Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 75. Summer's here, 4th of July is nearly here, so this episode we're going to celebrate, and it starts off with me going back 6 years this week in history to what could be my worst author event, book event ever. You can be the judge of that. We're going to take a road trip to probably the smallest town that I will talk about land-wise, and that is the small town of Nahant, Massachusetts. We're going to go way, way back in the day and talk about the Lee J Ames series of drawing books that I remember from elementary school. There's going to be a brand new top 5 that are the top 5 highest grossing films ever when adjusted for inflation. And of course, there's a brand new This Week in History and Time Capsule, all coming up right now on episode 75 of the In My Footsteps podcast. So welcome to summer. 4th of July weekend is coming up very soon from when this podcast goes live. Much of the country has the heat and humidity. Up here in New England, we don't have much of the humidity yet, but that's coming. It's been beautiful, perfect weather to be outside. Just get outside if you're walking in the woods, if you're riding on the bike trail, if you're taking a boat out on the river, on the ocean. Do it all now, because before you know it, it's going to be cold and snowing again, so you got to take advantage of these days when you've got them. This is the 75th episode of the podcast, and according to my hosting site, Buzzsprout, I get some kind of achievement award for reaching 75 episodes. So I wanted to thank everyone who's been tuning in. I've been doing this podcast for well over a year and a half. I hope you've enjoyed the topics that I've come up with. Some of them are self-deprecating humors, telling stories of embarrassment that are good for the soul to share. They're cathartic. And we're going to have another one to kick off the podcast in a minute, so you'll have some laughs. I appreciate those of you that share the podcast, that leave positive reviews, that spread it around word of mouth to get more people listening. That's how it grows. As much as I'd love to say go to buy me a coffee and just donate so I can buy ads for the podcast, it's more important to share, and sharing it costs nothing. So that's what I really lean into. So coming up the end of next month, so July starts tomorrow from when this podcast goes live. So coming up at the end of July, there's going to be a special, at least one showing of the Lady of the Dunes documentary. And it's very meaningful. It's going to be July 26th, which was the day that the body of the victim was found in the dunes. So it's the anniversary. And it's going to be shown in Provincetown. I believe it's at the Water's Edge Cinema on Commercial Street. But I'll have to get more details from Frank, the producer. We're kind of figuring it out, because there may be more than one showing. I think there's going to be more than one showing, but they're going to do one on the actual date that the body was found, kind of symbolic. But I wanted to get that word out, put that bug in your ear. Anyone who's on the Cape, off the Cape, if you're within a couple of hours drive, come to the event. I'm going to be at the one on July 26th. Naturally, I'll have more information as it gets closer to the day, but I wanted to start off by saying that so that you can kind of make your plans, set your calendar. And that's what I've done all through time with my book events, my author events. Put the bug out there so people can go and show up and support me. And if you want to go and see these events, and I've had loads of successful events that I loved, but we're going to start off the podcast with one that could go down as my worst event ever. So let's go back to what could be my worst author event ever. So get ready for some laughs and maybe shake your head. Coming up right now on episode 75 of the In My Footsteps podcast. So I've done dozens and dozens of author events over the years, and the vast majority of them are super fun, positive, almost mundane in a way that it's just formulaic. I go in, meet and greet, usually have a PowerPoint presentation about whichever book or books I'm talking about. Then we have questions, I sign some books, and, that's it. I've done events at almost every town on the Cape and all these different bookstores and libraries, even places that aren't bookstores or libraries. And I've expanded to go up near Boston. That's kind of the furthest that I've gone. And like I said, most of these events are fun. I can't tell you a lot of details about each because they all kind of blend into each other, which is why the one that I'm going to talk about today, you'll notice in the description of the podcast, I put my worst event ever with a question mark. I'm going to leave that up to you because I've had some unique events. I've done events at the Vitamin Shop. I've done events at the gift shop of the Chatham Bars Inn, at a Not Your Average Joe's restaurant, in a church basement. But this particular one is the one that has the story that sounds like a tragedy written for a movie. I love getting to go to Martha's Vineyard. I don't get to do it that often, maybe once a year if I'm lucky. And I've gone over there for Grand Illumination. I've gone over there and run races. So 6 years ago, this week in history, July 7th, 2016, I had my first and thus far only chance to do an author event on Martha's Vineyard. So why could this be considered my worst event ever? Well, there's a whole lot of stuff. So let's just start at the beginning. A typical event I do, I pack my car, I drive to wherever it is, I unpack my car, and there you go. Simple as that. For the vineyard, I had to drive to Woods Hole to the Steamship Authority ferry, which 4th of July week, it was very busy. I had to leave at least 45 minutes before I would have normally left to go there. So it's a long drive. There's traffic, but it's going to be worth it. It's Martha's Vineyard. It's summer. It's going to be an awesome book event. There'll be a lot of tourists there. So I had a whole plan. I packed up my gym bag with my laptop with stacks of books and then my notes that I need for the presentation. So I've got that in the backseat of my car. I've driven to the Steamship Authority. There you got to pay for parking. So there's strike one. Then you got to buy a ticket to get on the ferry to go to the vineyard. So there's more cash out of my pocket. But I'm so excited. And I get on the boat with my bag. And I find like a booth and sit in the booth with my bag. So we're on our way to the vineyard. The ferry's 45 minutes to get over to the island. So it's enough time to kind of sit and relax, but you can't do too much. So all I had brought was a couple of snacks and a bottle of flavored seltzer water. The seltzer water proceeded to explode everywhere, which I guess was better than it being soda because it was just water, so it wasn't sticky, and I didn't have my laptop out, so it was not that much damage done, but that should have been an omen for what was to come. So keep in mind, this event is in Edgartown on Martha's Vineyard starting at 7 p.m. So when you start to roll back time, for me to get to the Steamship Authority from home, it's 45 minutes, but it's extra time because it's 4th of July. Then it's waiting for the boat to leave. Then it's 45 minutes to get over to Oak Bluffs, which is where the boat would dock. So that's a lot of time when you rewind that I had to be out of the house to go. We get to Ocean Park. It's a beautiful afternoon. I start taking some pictures with my phone. Had a little time to walk around Ocean Park, but you can't walk that far because I've got my gym bag full of books and my laptop, so it's like a workout every step I take. But now I'm on the island, so I'm at the mercy of the bus, so I had to take that public transportation. I had to wait for the bus to show up, buy my bus ticket, which is not that expensive, but that's more money out of the pocket before I even do my event. I get on the bus, and we start heading from Oak Bluffs down to Edgartown, all this beautiful scenery, and I start to get this nice calm feeling like, here we go. We're heading to Edgartown. This is going to be an amazing event. From Oak Bluffs down to Edgartown, depending on how many stops there are, it's usually 20 minutes, just over 20 minutes. It could be a few minutes longer with traffic. But still, we get down to the area where the library is, and I'm there in plenty of time. I like to be very early, just in case anything goes wrong. There's time to kind of fix it. So I probably got to the library by 6:30 at the latest, giving me a half hour to set up everything and wait for people to file in. But it's when I get off the bus in Edgartown that I start to notice the problems. One, there was a little bit of street construction, street repair in the area around the library. So it wasn't exactly a detour directing people away from the library, but it made it kind of harder to get into the parking lot, if that makes sense. Where if you were planning to go to the library, you could still go. But if you were on the fence just driving around and you saw a place that didn't have construction in front of it compared to one that did, you'd probably choose the easier path. Then I notice as I get up to the door to go into the library that A, it's locked. B, the hours say closed at 5, which it is what it is. But every other event that I've done at libraries, usually they are during open hours, so people could come into the library as well and see the event. This was going to be an event held 2 hours after closing, and there was a little promotional poster for it in the window. And I mean little, like 8 by 11, like a normal sheet of paper size. Finally, a librarian comes and unlocks the door, and I've kind of got red flags going on in my head with the construction and with it being after library hours. The librarian said that the hours had recently been changed, I believe, so it was like a brand new schedule. But I keep going. I go in with all my stuff. We go into the conference room, and it's dark, but we have to turn the light on so I can set everything up. And the hookup works for my laptop, the projector screen. I've got the presentation ready for my Martha's Vineyard travel guide book to talk about it. I got all my books laid out for sale. Oh, man, it's going to be a great event. I just have that feeling, despite all of the red flags. So the librarian says let her know if I need anything, but then she leaves. So it's me by myself in this kind of catacombs of the library waiting for people to show up. Normally at these events, people start showing up anywhere 15 to 20 minutes early. So I like to be there before them because I've had events where I've gotten there a little bit later than I wanted to, and there's people already waiting for me. So time's ticking, the clock's ticking super loud like it's echoing in the room to just emphasize it. It's 6:45, 6:50, 6:55. Nobody has come in. The librarian comes back in, and I'm just like, oh, man, this is not good. And that's when she mentions to me about the construction, about the changing of the hours. And in my mind, I'm like, uh-oh, this has been sabotaged. Maybe not intentionally, but this event is going to fail. But I keep my faith, and it gets to be 7. I'm like, uh-oh, nobody. So I wait. 7:05, 7:10, 7:15, nobody. And in my mind, once it hit 7 and nobody showed up, I knew it was going to be a bust because I could only imagine driving around on 4th of July weekend and 4th of July week on the Vineyard. Like, who's going to stop into a library especially if they don't know the new hours? So they look at it, it's closed. They don't know there's an event, so why are they going to go there? And there's construction that makes it a little hard to get in the parking lot anyway. So boo to all of that. A few minutes more, and the librarian feels terrible, and I'm just like, oh, God. So now I have to plan on going back home, not selling any books, lugging that heavy bag with my laptop and the books in it. I'm pretty sure I had a nice rash on my shoulder from the strap rubbing against it. The librarian feels bad, so she bought 2 of the books to cover my ferry ticket back home. That's all I got. Nothing from the library. I got 2 books bought, which paid for, I guess my ticket, but not my parking back at the lot. And then the librarian drove me to the ferry station in Oak Bluffs. So we're having to drive, and I'm having to, make conversation when I'm just so disappointed, but trying to pretend to be happy just in case we do another event there someday. So I get a ride to the ferry with a stranger that I'm just disappointed in the whole day. What a fail. I get on the ferry and I'm just take it back home. So by the time all was said and done and I was sitting back in my car in the Woods Hole parking lot, I was probably out $60, $70. So I got to pay all that money to go to the Vineyard and carry books around and stand in a library for 45 minutes. Needless to say, I have not gone back to the Vineyard to do an event, and that's not an indictment on the island. It's just when I think of the potential issues I don't want to risk it. I did an event on Nantucket that was awesome at Mitchell's bookstore, and that was amazing. So it's like totally different for that island. But there you have it. When I say this was my worst event, it's just a series of unfortunate circumstances that all led together, where if there had been no construction and if it had been held during library hours, it would have been a far different thing. But my name 6 years ago didn't carry any cachet, so no one's going to go out of their way to see me. So what do you think? Was it the worst event of my life? Some of you that have gone to events, you've seen the good ones. At the very least, it's good for some laughs. I can look back and laugh at it. I even laughed when I got home that night. Just like, whatever, you can chalk it up to just a learning experience. I'm sure at some point I will share some of the better book experiences, but I wanted to share with you one of the most embarrassing so you can have some laughs and feel better if you're having a bad day. Like I said at the top of the podcast, this week's road trip is going to be probably the smallest town, at least in terms of actual physical land, that I've done for the podcast. But that doesn't make the town of Nahant, Massachusetts any less incredible and beautiful than any other that I've talked about on the 75 episodes of the podcast. It is a crown jewel amongst crown jewels that is the North Shore of Massachusetts. One of my absolute favorite places to visit, that whole area of the North Shore. From just north of Boston, Revere, all the way up to the New Hampshire border. It's incredible. You can't go wrong with any of those towns. And you'll hear a lot more about a lot of them in the coming episodes of the podcast. But right now we're sticking with Nahant. Nahant is about 15 miles north of Boston, so it's not that far as the crow flies, as that phrase goes. But it can take longer to get there based on traffic. For me, from Cape Cod, it's about 90 miles, so it takes usually a little over 2 hours, but it's always worth the drive. That's another thing with these road trips. When I tell you that all these places are worth the drive, I mean it. I'm not going to tell you about a place that I secretly hate and then have you go there and just kind of laugh at you. Nahant, the town itself, is only 1 square mile in size. And when you look at it on a map, it looks like a really skinny arm with a fist kind of sticking out into the water. But that's part of the charm of Nahant, is it's kind of like going to an island. It's connected by a causeway with Nahant Beach, which kind of extends into Lynn Beach to the north. And Nahant Beach, it's several hundred yards. It's beautiful sand. It's kind of protected, so there's not giant waves. And I think that's where a lot of people go. If they're going to Nahant, they go to the beach and kind of stay there. Because the rest of the town, yeah, there are restaurants and bed and breakfasts. There's other beaches, but it's also residential neighborhood. There are no bad views if you're driving around Nahant, which doesn't take you very long. But there's really no bad views. Even when you're in the middle of the neighborhood, the island that makes up Nahant, you can still really see the water. Probably the best view, at least in my opinion, is all the way on the southern coast of Nahant and Tudor Beach and Dorothy Cove. The reason being is that's where you get the beautiful view of the Boston skyline. And there's incredible, ample photo opportunities of the Boston skyline. Sometimes you'll get boats, fishing boats passing by, and you can get these great perspective shots. You'll see when driving around the actual town of Nahant, it's pretty tightly packed. You'll be surprised how many people fit in there. Like I said, it's 1 square mile of land, and some of it is Nahant Beach, but there's the main Nahant, which is like the fist of the arm. Then there's Little Nahant Island, which is a smaller offshoot right near the beach. The population of Nahant is 3,334 people as of 2020. So think about that in 1 square mile of land, which includes Nahant Beach. There's over 3,300 people. So that's a pretty good population density for such a small area. So if you go to Nahant Beach or you go to Tudor Beach and get pictures of the Boston skyline, you're going to work up an appetite from being in the sun. One place that I found interesting when I got there, and it's still there to this day, they have a Dunkin' Donuts on Nahant, but it's not your typical Dunkin' Donuts. When you picture it, you can see in your head a certain image of Dunkin' Donuts, or Dunkin' as they're just called now. But in Nahant, they have a Dunkin' Donuts cafe, and it's kind of this sea blue color. It looks nothing like any other Dunkin' Donuts I've ever seen. The only other Dunkin' that looks different than the typical prototype is the original in Quincy, because they kept that to look the same as the original. I'll talk about Dunkin' in a future podcast, I'm sure, because they're everywhere on Cape Cod and New England. If you don't want to go to the Dunkin' Donuts cafe to get something to eat, check out Tide's Restaurant and Pub at 2 Wilson Road and also tidesnahant.com. They are the classic beachfront American-style restaurant, indoor-outdoor seating, seafood, prime rib, chicken, pizza, all that good stuff. They strongly recommend reservations, so that should tell you that they're pretty popular. I kind of debated even putting their address in as far as you finding it, because if you get to Nahant, like I said, it's 1 square mile. You're going to find this place eventually anyway. And there's other things to see besides beaches, naturally. There's the Historical Society at 41 Valley Road. The whole area, I keep wanting to call it an island, but it's attached by a causeway, so it's not really an island, but it has that vibe where it feels like this little escape within an escape. This is one type of area to talk about on the podcast that I would really recommend finding a place to park and just walk and soak in the vibe. There's loads of little parks and nooks and crannies, these little beaches. I mean, 40 Steps Beach is not that secret, but there's parks, there's little areas that you can find your own hidden gem. There's the Henry Cabot Lodge House at 5 Cliff Street, which is an historic place. It's the only known designated residence of the former United States Senator Henry Cabot Lodge. It's currently listed as temporarily closed. That must mean they're not doing indoor tours and such, but that may change. So if you like history, you can always go and check and see if they're open. But if not, you can always drive by and see it from the outside. Being that Nahant is so small, like I said, there's not many restaurants and places to stay on it, but luckily it's very centrally located for the North Shore. You're literally right near Lynn, Saugus, Marblehead. Those places all have places to stay overnight. But Nahant, you can easily make a day out of. Going to the beach, checking out the different parks, the different rocky cliff ledges that you can hang out on and get pictures of the Boston skyline. I always found it fun to just go for a walk. It's a neat feeling. I can't explain it. It's one of those, just go there and see if you feel the vibe that I felt. I'm a huge fan of Nahant. It's a place that I love to visit, even though it's really, really small land-wise. Check out GreaterLynnChamber.com. That's the Chamber of Commerce for Southern Essex County. Nahant doesn't really have its own chamber, but if you go to that Greater Lynn site, I'll put a link in the description in the podcast. That'll give you more of things to see that I may have missed and things in the surrounding area to make it where it's more than just a day trip where you spend a few days on the North Shore, which is never a bad thing. But like I always say with these road trips, just go to these places and find your own way. There's probably things that I missed in my time going there that maybe you can share with me. And as always, I'll be back in the next episode with a new road trip to hopefully give you things to put on your own travel checklist. This week in history, we are going back 85 years ago this week to June 30th, 1937, and the creation of the very first emergency phone number. Long before there was 911 in America, there was 999 in England. It's an interesting and very sad story as to how 999 first became a thing. In 1935, there was a house fire in which 5 women were killed in London, and even though a neighbor tried to call the fire department, he got put on hold and ended up not being able to get through, which led to the women all dying. And this led to outrage and letters to the newspapers, which got the ball rolling for an emergency phone number line specifically for emergencies. The number 999 was chosen because it was easy to remember, easy to dial, and on June 30th, 1937, it was put into use. Strangely, it took 11 whole years for the entire United Kingdom to be covered by 999, which is weird that you would start this phone number up and then it wouldn't cover everyone for 11 years. But by 1950, 999 was fielding 80,000 calls a year. In present day, the phone number gets about 597,000 calls a week. But the UK also accepts emergency phone calls to 112 in addition to 999. In the US, we adopted 911 as our emergency phone number in the late 1960s. And if you were wondering, in the US, we average about 600,000 calls to 911 per day. So that's a lot. But the very first ever emergency phone number, 999, was put into effect in the United Kingdom 85 years ago this week in history. And now it is time for a brand new time capsule. We are going back 53 years ago this week, July 1st, 1969. Why? Because it's the summer of 69, like Bryan Adams' song. Which, if you know about the song, you know the summer of 69 is not exactly about the year because Bryan Adams wasn't old enough to do all the things he talked about in the song. I had to mention it because when I finally learned about what the double entendre was from that song, it changed it forever. Not in a bad way. It's still a great song, but I wanted to mention the summer of 69 and go listen to it with different ears if you didn't know. The number one song was Love Theme from Romeo and Juliet by Henry Mancini and his orchestra. If the name Henry Mancini sounds familiar, it's because he also created the famous Pink Panther theme song, which you definitely know. If you don't know it, look it up and you'll say, oh yeah, I remember that. Mancini is considered to be one of the greatest composers in the history of film. In his career, he won 4 Academy Awards, a Golden Globe, and 20 Grammy Awards. The number one movie was The Love Bug, also known as Herbie. If you know Herbie the Love Bug, then you probably know this Walt Disney movie. It's a comedy starring Dean Jones, Michelle Lee, Buddy Hackett, and of course Herbie, the anthropomorphic white 1963 Volkswagen Beetle. The movie made over $51 million on a budget of $5 million. It's 78% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. And Herbie was in 4 theatrical sequels and a short-lived TV series. The number one TV show was Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. So this one was tough finding the Nielsen ratings for this period of time. Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was the number one show for the season, so I included it. It was a sketch comedy show starring Dan Rowan and Dick Martin. It started the career of Goldie Hawn. There were other legends of comedy in there, like Ruth Buzzy, Joanne Worley, Lily Tomlin, Flip Wilson, Henry Gibson, and it ran for a total of 6 seasons and 140 episodes. And if you were around back then, July 1st, 1969, and you were looking for a new home, you were in luck. You could get yourself a beautiful 3-bedroom home, a walk to the water in the beautiful town of Scituate in Massachusetts on the South Shore, another one of my favorite places, fieldstone fireplace, beamed ceilings in the living room. Man, how much did that cost? $16,400. Or just over $130,000 when adjusted for inflation. And if you were wondering how much a house like that would cost now, realistically within a walk to the water in Scituate, well, the cheapest one I found was $675,000, or nearly 5 times what inflation says it should cost. So there's your housing market. But that'll wrap up another This Week in History, another time capsule, and we're going to jump into a brand new top 5 that's going to be the top 5 highest grossing movies ever when inflation is factored in. So this list will actually go in order, and it starts right now. This is going to be a rarity when it comes to the top 5 lists. All the times that I do these, I say the lists are in no particular order. Well, this time is different because this is going to be the top 5 highest grossing movies of all time when adjusted for inflation. Because as the years go on, it gets harder to tell what movies have been hits in the past because buying tickets was cheaper. So today, if a ticket to the theater is $12, $13, a movie could be a bomb, but it would make more money than Wizard of Oz that, if tickets were 35 cents. So that's where the inflation comes in. It kind of levels the playing field. So the honorable mentions are going to be numbers 10 through 6, but I'm not going to do the box office and everything for it. They're just going to be the names. So highest grossing films ever, numbers 10 through 6. Number 10, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Number 9, Dr. Zhivago. Number 8, The Ten Commandments. Number 7, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And number 6, Sound of Music. So those are 10 through 6. Let's get into the actual top 5 highest grossing films ever. Number 5 is Avengers Endgame with an adjusted $2.9 billion. This movie is considered the final Avengers movie. It's the most recent on the list from 2019. All of you Marvel fans know all about this movie, and the fact that it's made so much money and so recent just shows you how big of a movie it was. Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, Scarlett Johansson, Mark Ruffalo, and so many more starred in this. Number 4 is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope from 1977. This is the original Star Wars movie despite being Episode 4. It made $3 billion when adjusted for inflation. This is the Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Darth Vader, the beginning of the Rebels Against the Empire, the start of just this monster franchise that is still going to this day. I will tell you, when it comes to Star Wars, I don't know if that number, $3 billion, the adjusted, if it's for just the original release, or if it includes all of the re-releases, because I went and saw it in 1997, I believe, when they redid a lot of the special effects. So I can tell you, I don't know if it includes every time it's been in the theater. So that's just something to put in there as a disclaimer for this list. Number 3 is Titanic from 1997, the king of romantic movies, historical romance. It made $3.2 billion when adjusted for inflation. This is the story of star-crossed lovers, Jack and Rose, on the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that ends up sinking. It won 11 Academy Awards, so that should tell you how big of a film it was. Tied for the most ever. I went and saw it in the theater 3 times, and that movie's long. But if you can tell from the podcast, I'm a huge history buff, so being able to kind of be on the Titanic, even if it was in movie form, was something I couldn't pass up. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, Billy Zane, Kathy Bates. It's 87% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and if you haven't seen it, I'd be really surprised. Number 2 is Avatar, which made $3.3 billion when adjusted for inflation. This movie came out in 2009. It's 82% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a James Cameron movie, science fiction movie about the Na'vi people that live on Pandora. They're all blue. Some amazing CGI effects and motion capture. I mean, it's got a great story, but the visual effects are really what make it stand out. It stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, Sigourney Weaver, Michelle Rodriguez, and more. And I'm pretty sure most of you that are listening have seen this movie because it's pretty recent. And for those waiting, the sequel to Avatar is supposed to drop in theaters later this year in December. So get ready for that. And then there's supposed to be a bunch of sequels coming after that too. And finally, number one, the highest grossing film ever when adjusted for inflation is Gone with the Wind at $3.7 billion. This movie is from 1939 and stars Vivien Leigh, Clark Gable, Olivia de Havilland, and Hattie McDaniel. It's a classic Civil War drama based around Scarlett O'Hara, and the movie clocks in at 3 hours and 42 minutes. I mean, that's a long time to sit through. It's 90% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes and is kind of a rite of passage movie for those that are into American cinema. It's right up there with movies like Citizen Kane and a whole bunch of others from that time, but I don't want to get into a whole other list of like rites of passage movies as far as being film fans goes. That'll be another top 5. But there you go, the top 5 highest grossing movies ever when adjusted for inflation. Have you seen any of these or all of these? Number 5 was Avengers Endgame. Number 4 was Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Number 3 was Titanic. Number 2 was Avatar. And number 1 was Gone with the Wind. And we'll be back next week with the brand new top 5 that'll probably be in no particular order once again. Much of my memories of elementary school, specifically the first few years of school, have been lost to history in the haze of getting older. But there are some memories that remain. The very first field day we had, which was in the gymnasium at South Yarmouth Elementary, playing the Around the World math game that I spoke about in the podcast previously. Having some jerk kid stab me in the finger with a graphite pencil to where I still have a little dot on my finger where the graphite is lodged. Or having my world crushed when Apollo Creed was killed in Rocky IV, but then having my world revived when I realized that it was just an actor in a movie and they weren't real. One such memory that stuck with me, kind of in an earworm / hazy sort of way, were these drawing books. For years, they would kind of be in my head, and it's based on a funny little song that I made up. And in our library in elementary school, there were these series of books by a man named Lee J Ames, whose name I didn't remember until recently, doing research for what would be this segment on the podcast. But I decided to go way back in the day to talk about him. Some of you might remember his books. He had a series, the Draw 50 series. So the original book that I remember was just called Draw, Draw, Draw. And it had kind of half-done sketches on the front cover. That original Draw, Draw, Draw book was from 1962. So I was in school. I started in 1983. So that book was already old when it was in the library when I saw it. But the book would show you how to draw basic things, human faces, trees, anything like that. And me as a kid, I wanted to be able to draw, to sketch. I never really had that ability. My drawing skill is very minimal. But Lee J Ames's books made it seem easy to do it because he would go step by step. But the Draw 50 series was the one that really stuck out for me. That's what he's known for. So there's a book, Draw 50 Animals. There's a book, Draw 50 Boats, Ships, Trucks, and Trains. And so those 3 books were side by side on the shelves in the library at South Yarmouth Elementary. And it became almost like a song. Draw, 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 draw 50 animals, draw 50 boats, ships, trucks, and trains. Now, granted, I was a 7-year-old kid, so this is not exactly super complex poetry, but the song of those 3 book titles, I kid you not, has been an earworm in my head for the last almost 40 years. It's amazing what childhood memories get kind of imprinted on your brain, where something like the title of 3 Lee J Ames drawing books is stuck with me. There are more than 20 of these Draw 50 books by Lee J Ames, and they've sold more than 2 million copies. And I'm sure generations of young artists have gotten some use out of them, because the Draw 50 Animals books, or the trains and trucks and such, it gives you kind of a template on how to draw things so they look at least relatively real. Lee J Ames got his start as an artist in residence for Doubleday Publishing, a designer, an advertising artist, totally into graphics. While he was at Doubleday, his editor suggested that he write a book, and Lee J Ames said that he wasn't much of a writer, but he could basically draw a book and show you how to draw at least similar to how he does. The first book, Draw, 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 which I mentioned, that was a modest success, but it was 12 years until Draw 50 Animals came out in 1974. And these books were typically without text. I guess you'd have to look. I mean, I'm sure you could find words. But when it comes to doing something like drawing a tiger's head, you don't really need description. You just need step-by-step instructions, especially when you're children in elementary school, and some of you probably can't read. It's easier to just look at the pictures and imitate them. Now, I didn't become a great artist due to these Draw 50 series books, but that's not a slight on Lee J Ames. It's just drawing was never my thing. I wonder if any of you out there ever heard of these books. They're still for sale on Amazon, so you could go and find them and try to hone your craft. There's an interview with Lee J Ames on his website, so his website no longer exists. What you have to do is go to archive.org, and at the top of the page is the Wayback Machine. What you do is you can put in a web address, even one that doesn't exist anymore, and if it was snapshotted at any point in its existence, you can go back and click on the website. So I went to Lee J Ames's website back in 2005 to see an interview with him. His site, or at least the site that brings you to there, is epcom.com/draw50/Lee Ames. So that's a lot to do if you want to see a 20-year-old website of books that you might not remember. If you're my age or a little bit older, if you see the covers of these Draw 50 series, they probably will bring you back to where it's something that you don't remember, but it'll be one of those flashbacks that'll get you. Like I said, I only remember the Draw, Draw, Draw book and the first 2, the Draw 50 Animals and the Boats, Ships, Trucks, and Trains, but there are 26 total. They include athletes, aliens, dogs, famous faces. These are all the books. And it is really simple as far as how to do it. It's typically 4 or 5 layered sketches where there's an ink, like a red ink, and it'll start with the darker red ink with what to do in that sketch. And then in the second one, the previous stuff you've done is now a lighter color, and it's got the darker color for what to add to it. You'd have to see it. I'm trying to describe it, and it's not going to make sense. But for me, remembering it as a kid, it does make sense. If you go to Amazon or if you go to thriftbooks.com, you can find all of these. They get reprinted, so the covers are going to be more modern. I don't know if you could find originals from 50 years ago. They'd probably be way more expensive than you'd want to spend on a drawing book that you might use once or twice and then stick it on a shelf. Lee J Ames was over 40 years old when that Draw book came out, and he was in his early 50s when he started the Draw 50 series. So that's one of those things where it's never too late to be a success or to find your way, which is not a route I expected to take when talking about these books. But the fact that he was in his early 50s and started a series of successful books, that's kind of gives hope to everyone out there. He died in 2011 at the age of 90. So he lived a long, successful life, and his books, I know they influenced generations of artists, because I haven't been in an elementary school library recently, but I'm pretty sure they probably have those books even in there still. Maybe you can tell me if you are a elementary school librarian or a librarian in general, if you have the Lee J Ames series of drawing books. And if you're one of those that used the books or remember the books, did they help you become a better artist? For me, I enjoyed trying to draw, but I was never good enough, so I would just get frustrated, and then I became a writer instead. But that's a look way, way back in the day at the Lee J Ames series of drawing books that became an earworm in my head because of my little song about the first 3 titles. Like I said, it's amazing what sticks in your mind from when you were a child. And that's going to wrap up episode 75 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in, who has checked out these podcasts. Even if this is your first time, thank you. I really enjoy making these, so the fact that people are listening, that makes it even better. If you can't get enough of me and my voice, you can find me all over social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Check out my Facebook fan page. Go to my homepage, ChristopherSetterland.com. Check out the In My Footsteps podcast blog. Find me for personal training, medical fitness, corrective exercise, and more at Mind Body Spine Chiropractic in Brewster. I want to give a shout out to my extremely talented oldest niece, Kaylee. What we're going to start doing is promoting her Etsy store, Kiwi's Customs. She's got a lot of talent with crocheting, hats, cat sweaters, dog sweaters. She's learning how to crochet little stuffed animals like unicorns. These are perfect gifts for people with pets, people with little children, people that just enjoy talented, homemade, colorful crafts. She's also not one to speak about and promote herself. I was trying to get her to write me some kind of copy to do an advertisement for her shop on this week's podcast. I decided to just tell you what I enjoy about her work and her as an artist, and hopefully you'll go and check it out and order some stuff. I'm going to put a link to her shop in the description of the podcast. Go to Etsy.com. Look up Kiwi's Customs, because Kiwi was her nickname that her mom gave her as a little girl. So that just adds to the awe factor. But Kiwi's Customs is with K's. But go and check it out. I promise you'll enjoy it. Send her a message if there's things that you want to see her make. But you'll be hearing a lot more about that in the episodes to come. This is just the start. For me, for this podcast, next week is episode 76. We're going to have the 4th in the series of the Dedication to the Craft photography stories segments. This one is going to be all about my adventures with coyotes during photo shoots, which you won't want to miss. We're going to take a road trip to the beautiful island of Jamestown in Rhode Island. A town and island, it's both. We're going to go way, way back in the day and look at the origins of social media. It's everywhere today, but how did it start? Well, we'll talk about it next week. And because it's going to be July, they'll have a brand new top 5 that are going to be the top 5 Cape Cod beaches to visit and cluster at, in my opinion. And of course, there'll be a brand new This Week in History and Time Capsule, all coming up next week on episode 76 of the In My Footsteps podcast. And like I said at the top, the weather's beautiful. It's the time of year to get outside, soak in that vitamin D. It's good for your mental health. And if it's good for your mental health, you really should do it. I always say lean into the things that make you happy. If they're not causing harm to anyone else, it doesn't matter. Just do it because mental health is so important, especially in this day and age. For as bad as this world can be sometimes, and in this time in the world, it's the worst it's ever been, but in ways it is also the best it's ever been, which is a weird dichotomy. But when the world is really crap, a nice walk in the woods, a nice walk on the beach, time with family, time with friends, that can heal everything, even if it's just momentarily. We need more of that. So enjoy what makes you happy. Make time for those who are important to you. And remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment because you never know what tomorrow brings. And that is the truth. Thank you so much to everybody again for tuning in to episode 75. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I have been Christopher Setterlin, and I will talk to you all again soon.